The arena was alive with sound, a storm of voices echoing through the colossal dome that hung like a second sky above the alien city, and tonight every eye had come to see one thing, the apex predator. The creature had fought for years without defeat, and its name alone brought fear across worlds. It was a beast taller than two men, its body built of muscle layered with scars that told stories of past battles, and yet none of those scars were from wounds that had ever threatened its life. It was a living legend, a monster that had broken bones of reptilian warriors, crushed the armored shells of insectoids, and torn apart gladiators who thought themselves strong. Aliens from 100 systems had gathered in tiered seats that rose high into the air, their skin glowing in strange lights, their eyes fixed on the sand below where the predator waited, its claws dragging thin lines across the dirt floor, its heavy breaths like the growl of some ancient engine. The crowd roared with laughter and hunger, not because they feared the fight but because they expected the same thing that always happened, a quick kill, another victim torn apart in seconds, another night where the apex predator proved no creature alive could ever touch it. But then the gates at the far side of the arena opened, and the next challenger stepped out. He was small by comparison, a figure wrapped not in heavy armor but in simple combat gear, human military standard, black boots pressing into the sand with steady rhythm. His name was Lieutenant Marcus Hale, though to most in the crowd that detail meant nothing, because to them he was simply a human, one of the weaker species, fragile, soft-skinned, easy prey. Laughter broke out across the tiers when they saw him. Some aliens shouted wagers, betting on how fast he would die. Others called for the predator to make it brutal, to end the human in one strike. To the crowd this was entertainment, nothing more, but Marcus did not even blink at the noise. His eyes were locked on the monster across from him, and though the predator towered above him like a nightmare of claw and tooth, Marcus showed no fear. He walked forward slowly, shoulders straight, as if this was no different than stepping onto a battlefield back home. The predator's yellow eyes narrowed, its tongue flicking across its fangs, sensing prey that should have been trembling but was instead calm, too calm. The crowd grew louder, confused by the man's lack of panic, and one alien voice shouted, "The human will not last 10 seconds." That phrase spread through the audience, repeated like a chant, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds. The apex predator lifted its head and released a deep roar that rattled the walls of the arena, a sound that usually sent fear surging into the bones of challengers, but Marcus only exhaled once, steady, measuring his breaths. He did not see a god, he saw a target, and he studied it like a hunter studies game in the wild. Every scar, every movement of muscle, every twitch of its claws was a detail he recorded in his mind. He saw the way the predator leaned to its right leg slightly more, the way its left shoulder carried more scars, the way its breathing grew harsher when it turned. These were weaknesses, faint, but to Marcus they were openings waiting for the right strike. The crowd did not see what he saw. They saw only a fragile human standing against death itself. And yet, standing in that arena with sand shifting under his boots, Marcus Hale looked not like prey but like a man who had already decided the outcome of the fight. He rolled his shoulders once, cracked his neck, and lifted his hands into a ready stance. The predator stepped forward, claws raised, and the ground shook with its weight. The chants rose higher, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds. Somewhere in the back of the arena, a merchant whispered to his companion, "No human has ever stood against the apex predator. He will be gone before we blink." But as Marcus lowered his stance, eyes sharp, his lips curled into the faintest trace of a smile, the kind of smile a soldier gives when he has already mapped the battle before it begins. The arena lights caught the predator's fangs as it roared once more, but this time the human did not move back, he moved forward, 2 steps into the storm. Gasps rose from the crowd. No one dared step toward the apex predator, no one except this human. For a moment, silence cut through the noise as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. No one had ever wounded the apex predator. No one had ever even survived a full minute against it. And yet here was a human soldier, calm, fearless, and ready to test the legend. The question hung in every mind, whispering louder than the crowd, louder than the roars, louder than the pounding of claws against the sand. Would the human even last 10 seconds, or would he do what no creature had ever done before? The roar of the apex predator shook the arena as it charged, a blur of claws and muscle, its movements faster than its massive size should allow, and the alien crowd screamed with excitement because this was what they had come to see. The moment the predator tore its prey apart in an instant, but the human did not run, he did not scream, and he did not freeze in terror the way so many others had before him. Instead, Marcus Hale bent his knees and shifted his body with the calm precision of a Soldier who had trained his whole life for battles exactly like this. The ground split under the predator's weight as it leapt, claws outstretched to tear flesh, but in the heartbeat that followed Marcus was no longer where it expected him to be. He pivoted left, his boots kicking up sand, his body low, moving under the arc of a claw that could have cut him in half, and instead of retreating he moved closer, slipping past the strike in a motion so quick many in the audience missed it. For the first time in the history of the arena, the apex predator's blow found nothing but empty air. Gasps rippled through the tiers, a sound of shock that clashed against the roar of the beast, and before the predator could adjust, Marcus struck. His combat knife gleamed for a single flash of light as he slashed across the beast's shoulder, cutting through the thick hide that every alien believed to be impenetrable, and when blood spilled onto the sand it was as if the entire galaxy froze. The crowd went silent, thousands of eyes wide, jaws open, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. For years the apex predator had been untouchable, its skin said to be stronger than steel, but now bright crimson lines ran down its arm, dripping into the sand. The predator stumbled back, more from shock than pain, its yellow eyes narrowing with sudden fury. It had been wounded, truly wounded, and by a creature the galaxy considered weak. The silence lasted only a moment before the arena exploded in chaos, voices screaming in disbelief, wagers shouted in panic, and in the highest seats alien nobles leaned forward, their faces pale with fear and wonder. The predator released a roar that made the air tremble, a sound of rage, a promise of death, but Marcus did not flinch. His eyes stayed locked on the creature, his breathing steady, his mind already calculating the next move. He had drawn blood, but he knew this fight was far from over. The predator rushed again, faster, angrier, slashing in wild fury, its claws tearing chunks of stone from the arena walls, but Marcus moved with cold focus, each dodge timed to the fraction of a second, each step measured like a chess player planning 10 moves ahead. He had studied the beast in the opening moments, and now he understood its rhythm, its habits, the split-second windows where its attacks left small gaps. The crowd screamed with every near miss, believing the human would finally be crushed, but Marcus always slipped away, close enough to feel the heat of the monster's breath, close enough to smell the iron of its blood. The predator lunged with both claws extended, aiming to crush him between them, but Marcus dropped low and slid beneath its chest, dragging his knife in another quick strike across its ribcage. The sound that followed was not the roar of a victorious predator, but the cry of an animal realizing pain it had never known. Blood sprayed the sand again, and this time the audience's silence was not shock but terror. 2 wounds, in less than 5 seconds. Alien leaders exchanged nervous glances. Soldiers shifted in their armor. For the first time in centuries, the apex predator was bleeding openly, and it was a human who had done it. The predator's movements grew more savage, more desperate, its pride as wounded as its flesh, but Marcus kept pressing, never backing away, never letting the monster set the rhythm of the fight. He was not prey, he was the hunter now, and the realization began to show in the predator's eyes. When Marcus feinted right and then cut deep into the beast's thigh, the third wound tore free in under 10 seconds from the start of the battle, and the crowd erupted in one unified sound, not laughter, not cheer, but horror. The impossible had happened. The untouchable had been struck not once, not twice, but 3 times in less than 10 seconds, and each strike had landed with purpose, each cut placed with the precision of a soldier who knew how to end a fight quickly. The predator staggered, growling low, its breath ragged, and for the first time in its long reign of dominance its body showed weakness, its stance faltering, its movements slower. Marcus stood ready, knife steady in his grip, his boots firm in the sand, eyes unblinking. Around him the voices of thousands of aliens whispered the same question again and again, their fear rising like smoke. How could a human, a creature they thought fragile, wound the galaxy's greatest hunter 3 times in under 10 seconds? The apex predator's roar echoed like thunder, shaking the stone walls of the arena, but beneath that roar there was something new, something the crowd had never heard before, and it was fear. The monster that had ruled the sands for decades, the beast that had never been wounded, now dripped with its own blood, 3 deep cuts shining against its scarred body, and though the predator stood tall, its eyes betrayed the truth, they no longer burned only with hunger, they flickered with doubt. The alien crowd did not know whether to scream in rage or awe, some shouted for the fight to be stopped, others demanded the predator rip the human apart, but none could ignore what had happened. In less than 10 seconds Marcus Hale had done what no alien warrior could in a lifetime. The predator lunged again, its claws carving the air like blades, but Marcus did not panic, he moved with the same sharp rhythm, every step measured, every strike of the knife precise, and each time he dodged the crowd gasped, their voices louder than the roar of the beast. The predator's fury only grew, its attacks faster, wilder, but wild strikes meant mistakes, and Marcus saw them, small cracks in the pattern of movement, the fraction of a second when its weight shifted too far, the instant when its guard opened wide. He did not rush, he did not waste energy, he circled, calm, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, his knife ready, his eyes locked on the giant. In those moments, the crowd saw something terrifying, not a prey running from death but a hunter waiting for the perfect time to kill. The predator tried to crush him with both fists, but Marcus rolled away, the ground shattering where he had stood, and when the beast bent low to sweep him with its tail he leapt over it, landing with the grace of a soldier who had practiced 1,000 times before. He did not strike then, he waited, making the predator chase him, making the beast burn its energy, and with each failed attack the creature's rage grew louder, its breath harsher, its muscles trembling under its weight. The silence between the crowd's cries stretched longer, because they were watching something they did not believe possible. The apex predator was no longer the hunter, it was being toyed with, drawn into a rhythm set by a human. Then Marcus struck again, a feint to the left, a slash across the chest to the right, and the predator howled in pain, staggering back, its claws clutching at the new wound. The arena filled with chaos, merchants dropping their wages, nobles shouting orders to guards, soldiers gripping weapons as if preparing for war. Never had the apex predator been wounded this many times, and the blood staining the sand told a truth no one wanted to accept. The human had turned the fight upside down. Marcus kept moving, never still, his boots leaving trails in the sand as he circled, forcing the predator to spin, to turn, to stumble. He watched its chest heave, its claws tremble, and he knew, deep inside, that the beast had never faced a foe like him. It had fought brutes, it had fought armored warriors, but it had never fought a soldier who used patience, precision, and intelligence as weapons sharper than steel. And now the galaxy saw it too. Whispers ran through the crowd like fire spreading across dry grass, whispers of fear, whispers of awe, whispers that humans were not weak, whispers that maybe humans were something worse, something dangerous. The predator tried one last desperate charge, throwing its massive body forward with the speed of a falling star, but Marcus stepped aside at the final instant, his blade flashing in the dim light, carving across its ribs again. The beast roared, but it was no longer the roar of a champion, it was the roar of a wounded animal fighting against death. It stumbled, its knees shaking, its tail dragging in the sand, and though it still towered above the human it no longer looked invincible. The crowd could feel it, the shift in power, the moment when fear left the human and entered the predator. 10 seconds had passed, maybe more, but the legend of those 10 seconds would echo far longer. The untouchable had been touched, the unbreakable had been broken, and for the first time in living memory the apex predator looked not like a god of war but like prey. Marcus stood straight, his knife steady, his eyes burning not with arrogance but with calm certainty, and in that silence the aliens knew something dangerous had been unleashed. If one human could do this, what would happen if more arrived? The predator hissed low, stumbling but still alive, still fighting, but in its eyes shone the same thought now circling the arena like a shadow. The galaxy's greatest hunter had felt fear, and it had felt it at the hands of a human. The predator's body trembled as it stood in the center of the arena, blood dripping from its wounds, its chest rising and falling like a storm struggling to breathe, and the crowd that once roared with laughter now sat in uneasy silence, their alien eyes wide as they watched their champion falter. For centuries the apex predator had crushed every challenger, tearing through scales, shells, and steel, and never once had it bowed, never once had it shown weakness, but tonight, under the glow of the arena lights, its legs shook, its claws quivered, and its roars sounded less like the voice of an unstoppable hunter and more like the cry of a wounded beast. Marcus Hale stood only a few steps away, steady on his feet, knife still gripped firm in his hand, his uniform torn by close calls but his body untouched, and though he looked smaller than the monster before him, the crowd could see where the true power now rested. The predator tried to roar again, tried to raise its claws, but its arms felt heavy, and its vision blurred as the sand below it darkened with its own blood. Rage kept it standing, pride kept it from collapsing, but the damage was undeniable. It had never faced an enemy who did not panic, never faced prey that turned the hunt into a test of patience, and now its arrogance cracked like glass under weight. The audience shifted in their seats, nobles whispering to each other in panic, merchants clutching their winnings with trembling hands, guards glancing to commanders for orders, but no one spoke loud, no one wanted to break the fragile line between awe and terror. Marcus studied the predator the way a soldier studies the last moments of a battle, not with celebration, not with gloating, but with calm focus, eyes tracing its wounds, its movements, calculating whether it still had strength to strike. He knew better than to assume victory too soon, because a wounded beast was sometimes more dangerous than a healthy one, and he braced himself for the inevitable counterattack. It came in a burst of fury, the predator lunging forward with one last desperate attack, its claws swinging wide, its jaws snapping with rage, but the strike was slower than before, the power behind it heavy but clumsy, and Marcus slipped aside, the edge of a claw grazing past him but missing its mark. The predator staggered as its own weight dragged it forward, nearly crashing into the wall of the arena, and when it turned back its chest heaved with exhaustion, its eyes burning less with hunger and more with fear. The crowd gasped again, because they saw what the predator had not wanted them to see, the truth that its strength was breaking. Marcus stepped forward, one pace, his knife raised but not swinging yet, and that step alone made the predator recoil. The creature that had forced entire worlds to send their champions, the monster that had bathed in victory for years, stepped back from a human. The silence that followed was heavier than any roar, because it was the silence of an empire realizing its symbol of power was crumbling. Marcus moved again, his boots sinking into the blood-soaked sand, and his calm face seemed more terrifying to the crowd than the predator's rage. He did not scream, he did not taunt, he did not even look proud. He looked like a soldier doing his job, and that truth made aliens whisper in fear, because if one human soldier could break the apex predator, what could an army of humans do? The predator swung again, weaker this time, and Marcus deflected it with a swift parry, stepping close enough to press his knife against the beast's side before pulling back, leaving another shallow cut to remind it that he controlled the pace now. The predator howled, more from humiliation than pain, its pride shattered in front of thousands, but Marcus only stared with the same cold eyes, the eyes of someone who had fought wars against nightmares on Earth and had survived them all. The beast stumbled again, knees buckling, its body swaying like a mountain about to collapse, and though it fought to stay upright, the truth was written across every scar and wound, the apex predator was breaking. The crowd erupted in chaos, some screaming for the fight to end, others demanding blood, but no voice rose louder than the truth echoing inside every alien mind, the apex predator was no longer untouchable. Marcus took another step forward, his shadow merging with the beast's as he raised his blade, and for the first time in its long reign the predator lowered its head, not in surrender but in instinct, the instinct of prey sensing the end. In that moment, the arena was not a place of celebration, it was a place of fear, fear of what humans truly were, fear of the quiet soldier who had just shattered a legend without breaking a sweat. The predator tried to roar one last time, but the sound cracked in its throat, weak and broken, and as it fell to one knee the galaxy's greatest hunter bowed unwillingly before the one creature it had once considered weak. The arena was in chaos as the apex predator dropped to one knee, its massive claws digging into the sand, its chest heaving with ragged breaths, and the once celebrating crowd now howled in confusion, fear, and anger, because the impossible had happened before their eyes, the untouchable champion was broken by a human. Alien nobles shouted to stop the fight, calling it unfair, demanding that guards step in, and yet none dared to enter the sand, for even they knew the predator was no longer in control, the human was. Marcus Hale stood tall before the beast, his combat knife steady in his grip, his eyes sharp and calm as if he was still in training drills, and though his uniform was torn and his muscles burned with effort, he looked untouched compared to the bleeding monster that had ruled this place for centuries. The predator raised its head, its yellow eyes dim with pain and disbelief, and it growled weakly, trying to rise, but its legs betrayed it, and again it sagged under its own weight. Whispers ran like wildfire through the tiers of the arena, aliens asking the same question over and over. How could a human do this? How could a species thought fragile bring the galaxy's greatest hunter to its knees? And then Marcus spoke, his voice low but carrying across the silence that followed the predator's stumble, a soldier's voice hardened by years of war. He told them that this fight was nothing new to him, that on Earth predators far more relentless than this beast had stalked humans for ages, that his people had survived claws, fangs, venom, storms, fire, and endless threats long before they ever reached the stars. He explained that his knife was not his weapon was his mind, his training, his will to adapt, to strike when others panicked, to stand when others fled. The crowd listened in stunned silence, for no gladiator had ever spoken after facing the predator, only screams and final cries had echoed here, but this human stood steady, speaking as though this fight was routine. Marcus raised his blade slightly, not in boast but in lesson, and he said the scars that marked his enemy's body were proof that raw power was never enough, because every creature bleeds, every beast has weakness, and it only takes a human's patience and precision to find it. The predator, blood dripping into the sand, stared at him with something the galaxy had never seen before in its eyes, not rage, not hunger, but respect. Slowly, painfully, the beast lowered its head, not in surrender to death but in acknowledgement, an ancient instinct that recognized when it had been outmatched. The crowd erupted in uproar, some shouting betrayal, others demanding Marcus be executed before his victory spread fear to every corner of the empire. But others, quieter, began to murmur with awe, calling him not prey, not weak, but hunter. Guards moved at the edges of the arena, their weapons ready, but none entered, because they too felt what the predator had shown, that this human was no ordinary challenger, he was something else, something their galaxy had never prepared for. Marcus stepped back slowly, not out of fear but discipline, his knife still raised in case the beast lunged again, but he knew the fight was over. He had not only cut the predator's body, he had cut its legend, shattered the myth of invincibility that had ruled alien minds for centuries. And he knew what that meant, that whispers would spread far beyond these walls, that in the days to come entire species would speak of the night the apex predator fell and the human who made it fall. He could already see the faces of nobles pale with dread, calculating what this revelation meant for their power, for their armies, for their wars. If one human could break the unbreakable, what would an army of humans do? Marcus lowered his knife at last, his breathing even, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, and he spoke again, softer this time but no less sharp. "We are not the weakest," he said. "We are the survivors. And that is why you fear us." His words spread like fire through the silence, carried to the highest seats, carried to the farthest corners, carried into the hearts of those who had thought humans were nothing but prey. The predator let out one final groan, not of defiance but of exhaustion, and bowed its head lower into the sand, sealing the truth in front of all. The galaxy had just learned a secret it could never unlearn, that humans were not fragile, they were hunters disguised as prey, and that secret would haunt every leader who had thought otherwise. The arena gates slammed shut with a thunderous echo, but no one moved, no one spoke, because the moment was too heavy, too unreal, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. The apex predator, once untouchable, lay in the sand with blood streaking its chest, its head bowed not in defeat but in recognition, and the human who had done the impossible stood above it, knife steady in his hand, eyes sharp and cold. Marcus Hale did not smile, he did not cheer, for this was not a game to him, it was survival, and survival was something his people knew better than any empire, any beast, any ruler that claimed dominion. Around him, the alien crowd shifted, their roars splitting into two tides, one of fear and one of awe. Some screamed for the guards to cut him down before he left the sand, others shouted to crown him champion, and yet in both cries ran the same truth, that the human had broken the galaxy's oldest legend. A trembling alien noble, wrapped in shimmering robes, leaned forward from the high balcony, his voice cracking as he shouted that this was a trick, that no mere human could touch the apex predator, that sorcery or treachery must have been involved. But even as he said the words, his own guards would not meet his eyes, for they had seen the fight too, and they knew it was no trick, it was skill, it was will, it was something more dangerous than magic. Marcus stood still, watching the crowd the way a hunter watches a shifting forest, sensing danger behind every tree. He knew he was not safe, that the Empire could not allow this moment to spread, but he also knew it was already too late. In the shadows of the stands, traders whispered into their comms, sending out secret messages before the signals could be jammed. In the corridors, servants who had carried food and water to the nobles were already running to spread the tale. Beyond the arena, across cities and stations, the rumor would take root, the apex predator had bled, and a human had made it bleed. Marcus slowly slid his knife back into its sheath, his voice steady as he spoke a single sentence into the silence. "Remember what you saw. Nothing more, nothing less." With those words, he turned his back on the predator, the most dangerous act of all, walking toward the locked gates as if daring any to stop him. The beast behind him did not move, did not strike, for it too seemed bound by the weight of that command, and for the first time in its life, it allowed prey to leave alive. The guards at the gate hesitated, their weapons shaking, and though orders screamed through their earpieces to cut him down, none moved, for they had seen the truth, and killing him now would not erase it, it would only carve it deeper into history. Finally, with a creak of ancient metal, the gates opened, and Marcus walked into the corridor beyond, the torches casting his shadow long against the stone, the silence of the arena following him like a ghost. Behind him, the predator let out a final roar, not of victory, not of rage, but of something new, something the galaxy had never heard from its throat, respect. That sound shook the walls, carried through the city, and ensured that no rumor, no cover-up, no execution could silence what had just been born. By the time Marcus was dragged into a holding cell by panicked officials, the whispers had already spread across 3 star systems, carried on smugglers' ships, carried by frightened merchants, carried by slaves who at last had something to believe in. The legend had begun. In dark taverns, aliens spoke the name human with caution, as if it was suddenly heavier than before. In war councils, generals asked quiet questions about Earth, about its history, about what other secrets its people might hide. And in the Empire's palaces, rulers looked at one another with dread, for they knew the myth of their apex predator had fallen, and with it, the balance of power that had kept humanity caged. In his cell, Marcus sat alone, his hands still steady, his breathing calm, knowing he had done what no soldier before him had done. He had not just survived, he had changed the story. For the galaxy was built on stories, on myths of strength and fear, and now a new story was spreading, a story with a simple truth, that humans, the species thought weakest, were hunters disguised as prey, and that their time was coming. The guards outside his cell whispered when they thought he could not hear, wondering if the Empire would kill him quickly or put him on trial, but Marcus only closed his eyes and rested, because deep down he knew the truth. They could kill him, but they could not kill the legend. The fight in the arena was over, but the war for the galaxy's belief had just begun, and for the first time in centuries, humanity was no longer a shadow in the stars, it was the storm rising over them all. The Empire thought they could bury the story, silence the whispers, and erase the humans' victory in the arena, but legends do not obey orders, they grow where fear and hope collide, and this one grew faster than fire in dry fields. Across the galaxy, from crowded trade stations to lonely mining colonies, the tale spread in hushed voices. The apex predator had been struck 3 times in 10 seconds, and it was a human who did it. At first, many laughed, calling it a rumor made by smugglers to sell drinks or a lie whispered by rebels to spark unrest, but then came the recordings. Grainy, stolen footage slipped through the Empire's firewalls, showing Marcus Hale standing in the arena with blood on his blade, the predator falling to its knees. No propaganda could undo what every eye could see. The footage was banned within hours, punishable by death, but the harder the Empire tried to hide it, the faster it spread, carried on hidden channels, burned into secret data slates, smuggled across checkpoints by people who had never cared about humans before but now saw something worth risking for. On planets where humans were treated as laborious, beaten and mocked, the slaves stood taller, their voices sharper, for now they could look their masters in the eye and whisper, "We bleed the beast that none of you could touch." On worlds where warriors had always mocked Earth as weak, duels began to shift, for now even the strongest alien fighters wondered if the stories were true, and whether humans carried something inside them that no other species could understand. Meanwhile, inside his cell, Marcus waited. Days passed, then weeks, and though they starved him, though they beat him, though they tried to break him, he did not fall, for the fight in the arena had already done its work. He had made his mark, and nothing could erase it. Officials came in silence, cloaked in authority, offering him deals, offering him freedom if he would claim it was all a trick, if he would say the predator had gone easy on him, if he would admit he used hidden weapons. Marcus only answered with the same calm words, "You saw what happened." His silence was more dangerous than rebellion, his calm more frightening than rage, because every day he lived was another day the legend spread unchecked. Finally, the Empire made its choice. They would execute him publicly, before the entire galaxy, to show that no human could stand against their power. They thought this would end the whispers, that his death would erase his victory, but they did not understand the oldest truth of all, that martyrs are stronger than champions. The day of the execution came, and the arena was filled once more. Billions watched through screens and streams, waiting to see the human fall. The predator was brought out again, chained and enraged, to finish what it had started, to erase the shame of its defeat. The announcer's voice boomed, declaring that Marcus Hale would pay for his lies with blood. Yet as the gates opened and the guards dragged him out, something happened that none had expected. The predator did not charge. It did not roar. Instead, it lowered its head, staring at Marcus with eyes that no longer held hatred, only recognition. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder, and in that silence Marcus did the unthinkable. He raised his shackled hands, blooded and bruised, and said one sentence into the sky. "We are not prey." The words were carried on hidden mics, repeated across channels, echoed by millions who had been waiting for a sign. On distant colonies, humans whispered the words into the night. On warships, soldiers repeated them to one another. And in the hearts of the oppressed, the words became fire. Guards rushed forward, but it was too late. The predator let out a roar that shook the entire arena, not of anger, but of defiance, as if it too was declaring that the old order was broken. Chaos erupted. Some aliens screamed for blood, others shouted for freedom, and in that chaos the first cracks in the Empire's control began to show. Marcus was dragged away, beaten, hidden once more in the darkness, but it no longer mattered. His body was chained, but his voice was free, carried in the minds of billions. Whole rebel cells rose that same week, calling themselves the 10 Seconds. Slaves broke chains, miners seized ships, smugglers formed fleets, all using the humans' defiance as their banner. Across the galaxy, the Empire bled not from battles, but from the belief that spread like wildfire, that if one human could wound the apex predator, then perhaps anyone could wound the Empire. In the high palaces, rulers argued, their fear plain, for they understood what was happening. Power was not lost through armies alone, it was lost through stories, and the story had already escaped their grasp. Marcus Hale's name became a whisper in every shadow, a chant in every crowd, a warning in every council chamber. He was no longer just a soldier, he was a legend, and legends are impossible to kill. And so the galaxy turned, its balance shifting, its future rewritten by 10 seconds of steel and blood, and in the darkness of his cell, Marcus closed his eyes, hearing the distant echo of voices rising in unison, carrying his words into forever. We are not prey.